17 minutes to 3. I guess I better turn on the recorder again. Is it? Our assistant isn't here. I'll restate that we're reconvening our meeting at 17 minutes to 3. Our next item on our agenda is SageCon and draft LCD rulemaking update. And so...
Commissioner, you might sit over there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay?
Absolutely.
However, maybe Jamie sit here in front of you guys.
Oh, also, we have 3 members of our planning commission.
Yeah.
Yep.
I did recognize some of you guys. Good. Let me dig out more stuff here.
So did Harney County beat up very bad?
Not too bad.
Oh,
No,
well,
thank you.
because they've been waiting.
Well, that's what they said.
That-
They said, you got something coming when you get to Lakeview.
Oh, yeah.
They said they were gonna call you.
Well, I just tried phoning Steve, see if he thought about calling in this one, but he wouldn't answer the phone, so he's putting it all on my
There
shoulder.
you go.
Probably physical. My suggestion is kind of go over some things that Harney County, so we don't be redundant or duplicate.
Yeah. So what we did with Harney County was we just had, John gave a little overview of why we're doing the rules, just to remind you about how they fit with the larger ESA listing decision and the process that we've had to date. And then we're gonna go over some of the highlights in the rule, and then just have a conversation about, you know, questions that you might have, and then we'll talk about next steps, what's happening next in the adoption process and the public meetings that are coming up.
So that means you're on.
So I guess it does. So I'm glad that that you guys are able to fit us in today, and I'm glad Darwin's here, and I'm pleased to see some of the planning commissioners here as well. Commissioners, mayors, and Kester, you're probably aware of this conversation about sage grouse, and more specifically whether or not the sage grouse is listed under the Endangered Species Act, has been going on for quite some time. It is a position of the state of Oregon that we should attempt to avoid a listing. And to that end, a lot of work has gone into developing the state response, or formerly called All Lands, All Threats. But basically, the state's action plan for how we're addressing the primary threats, to the extent that we don't think a listing is necessary, or if a listing is imposed, that we're able to function under what we call a 4D rule, basically carry out the Oregon plan. Those threats really in not maybe exact order of importance, we're probably pretty close, are wildfire. You know, we experienced a lot of that down in southeast Oregon, as well as a conifer infestation, junipers basically, and noxious weeds. And then kind of a distant third to those 2 items is the potential, not necessarily the presence, but the potential large-scale development, which could fragment habitat. So as part of the state's overall effort, the governor's office, the last administration, has requested that LCDC commence rulemaking to sort of fill in the gap, to bridge the gap between where our land use program covers and take it the rest of the way to ensure that there's a uniform and predictable process to consider projects on sage-grouse habitat. And so that's what we try to do. We've had good attendance from a Rules Advisory Committee, a RAC, we call them RAC, and all 7 counties have been involved in that. Other NGO, non-governmental organizations, Cattlemen Association, Farm Bureau, Oregon Natural Desert Association, Trust Republic Land, or
Nature
Conservancy, the Nature Conservancy, not the Trust Republic Land. Got good assistance from some of our sister agencies, ODF&W in particular. And so we've tried to come up with basically a product that is the minimum of additional regulatory items to satisfy the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service while preserving the maximum amount of discretion and flexibility for local partners. And all this is done again, with the aim of heading off a listing to retain the ability for the state and Oregon counties to, make their own decisions and call their own shots, as opposed to being in a situation where the federal government has even more say what goes on and would have a role in what happens on private lands. So, that's really the effort, to try to avoid a listing, to try to maintain, the level of self-determination with local decision-making. But also necessarily, in doing so, we need to demonstrate to the service that we have an adequate mechanism to handle land use proposals and do it in a consistent, uniform way.
And I'll back up a little bit. Well, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, they have about 5 different categories of which they would determine the need for listing or not. And the 2 that came up with sage-grouse was habitat loss or fragmentation. And that's where wildfire in our area and juniper invasion and noxious weeds and whatever. The other criteria was lack of regulatory mechanism.
Right.
So that's where the U.S. Bureau of Land Management did their thing to beef up their regulatory mechanism. 1,000 pages there, front and back, would equate to 2,000 pages. And also they looked at the state and the counties, what you have as regulatory mechanisms to conserve the species. And that's what this addressed, our local regulatory mechanism.
So, yeah, that's exactly right. Thank you, Commissioner. And so that's sort of the backstory, so to speak, for the work that my department has been doing. We have had 5 Rules Advisory Committee meetings. The last one was June 2nd, wasn't that long ago. So today, in John Day. And I think that there has been, I think we have reached some understandings. I don't know that everybody on either side of the issue is entirely content. But I think that we have a relatively uniform understanding of kind of what we're trying to do and why we're trying to do it. And so I'll just look to Jamie and see if we can fill in any of those pieces there, and then if we want to talk about the text of the rule, we'll be more than happy to try to do that.
Yeah, thanks, John. And so I haven't met everybody here. I'm Jamie Damon. I'm the project manager for SageCon, so I've been leading the state's effort with the federal agencies and state agencies and the local government for putting together the state's action plan and what our state's response is to Fish and Wildlife Service about a listing decision. So that's been my role for the last almost 2 years. So just a couple of pieces to fill in for John. One is that these rules will be nested as a part of our state action plan. So the state action plan is a plan that's being put together by Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife through the governor's office that basically puts all in one place, all the actions that the state is doing, not just state agencies, but local government, soil water conservation districts, private property landowners through CCAAs. It's basically our whole collection of response for conservation for sage-grouse lives in this state action plan. And so these rules are a piece of that. They're one of our measures that we're doing to address this regulatory certainty question that was raised by Fish and Wildlife Service. So I just want to make sure that folks hear that. And then the other piece is there are actually 2 sets of rules. And there's the Land Conservation and Development Commission rules, which looks at how we can provide regulatory certainty across all the counties with regard to large-scale development, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But then there's also Fish and Wildlife Commission rules, which right now speak to mitigation, because the current Fish and Wildlife policy is no development in core habitat, period. There's no provision for mitigation, they don't support anything. And so the Fish and Wildlife Commission rulemaking is
Meaning the State Fish and Wildlife.
The State Fish and Wildlife Commission, right, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife rulemaking is to do a companion set of rules that opens up their mitigation policy to allow for mitigation to be applied in core habitat and other habitats. And so the 2 sets of rules fit together because this one is the process for how counties would work through with the development proposal about whether or not a proposal should occur. And then if it is determined that it can happen and there's mitigation required, then the ODFW rules come into play to help determine what that mitigation requirement might be. So that's just like postcard, back of the napkin version of how they fit together.
My ad, like we currently deal with Gold 5 and Deer Winter Range and things of that nature. This can folds in there,
Yeah.
but it's more explicit.
Yeah, so it's a companion set of rules that we also have an advisory committee for, that we also have had county participation in. And we'll talk a little bit towards the end about where that rulemaking is and the next steps for that as well. So, I can't remember, what else did I say on Harney County? I think that's I know what it was. So the other piece that's important, especially for planning commission members here, is that so these rules were put together through 5 meetings of the Rules Advisory Committee, which John said who all the folks were that sat on that. But we worked for nearly a year with your planners, with the planners from all the counties that were affected, to just try to understand and frame up what should be in these rules. Because at first there was some question about, kind of how far reaching the rules should be. And through working with your planners, so Darwin was at the table with us really regularly through those kind of work sessions, where we started to frame up, well, what kind of development are we talking about? Where are there potential gaps in our current land use planning system that we might need to, crank down on a little bit more? Where are some that are doing really well and, we don't want to touch because of unintended consequences, and how do we make a case for that? So the planners have been really helpful in trying to frame up what we put on the table in terms of, to address in the rule. And so we worked with folks for about a year in advance of the advisory committee to tee up that conversation. So that's why this rule is really focused on what we're calling large-scale development. And it's a very small set of potential future development that could have an impact in sensitive habitat that doesn't necessarily exist now, but that we need to have some way that we're addressing consistently across counties to satisfy Fish and Wildlife Service's question about regulatory certainty. So thank you, Darwin.
My first question, I have several of them, and we'll get to most all of them, we will get through all of them, is so you have the rule put together, you worked on all this. So two-part question is, people vote on it and decide this is the draft they're good on. Second part is our input today and the meetings you're gonna have, the public meetings, what's the value of that? Will that be taken into consideration? Will our input have any influence on changing what you guys have put together?
So,
Do we answer the first question, and you can answer the second one? So the first question had to do with decision-making about this draft, not so much the input. So the Rules Advisory Committee is done, and this is the draft that the committee is recommending for the commission's consideration for adoption.
Okay,
And
so
so
was there a vote on that? If there was, could we?
they did a consensus process, but as John said, often when you think of a consensus process, it's people are, kind of happy with the outcome. In this one, it was sort of people reluctant acceptance, I think is probably the best term to say. So people were saying, yes, we went as far as we can go, this is the best we can do, and this is the one draft set of rules that we're putting forward. And there's no minority report, so.
Basically, I missed the 2 days, and I still
Yeah,
got
John
to
Day, I know, it's hanging on.
Yeah, it's hanging on. And I did not give this crud to Chip Dell. He came down coincidentally at the same
yeah,
time.
right.
Okay,
Right.
just for the record.
Yeah. Like Jamie says, basically, it's not a hands-up vote or anything. We have a consensus group made of some environmental group, counties looking out for the economic and the property rights, and other groups looking out for how tight can you make it. And no individual is totally happy, but the gist of it all is how can we satisfy and keep these sage-grouse from being listed? Because if it's listed, it's governed by DC, and it could be crippling, very crippling. So it's a give and take a little bit for all parties here. We've kind of given away some of our discretion, tying it down, trying not to give away so much that it constrains us either. but stay within that, someplace in there that is satisfactory, adequate to satisfy the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, that we have local control to some extent.
So John can tackle the second.
Yeah, so to your second point, Commissioner Winters, I think that LCDC will invite your comments. I think they would love to hear what the counties have to say. I think they will certainly consider them. I've written lots of rules, and in many of them, particularly complex ones, I've seen our commission go in different directions than what we started out at. So, I can say confidently that if you have comments to offer, that they'll receive a fair hearing. I would also encourage you, if you wanted to submit comments and were prepared to do that in writing, the sooner that you get them to us, I don't mean tomorrow, but the more likely they'll be able to get to the commission in advance of the hearing, so they can take a look at them, and that I may be even able to include them or provide explanation with them in our staff report or supplemental staff report. So I think the commission is very interested in what the counties have to say and other parties have to say, and I think if they're felt to bring value to the product or are particularly relevant, I wouldn't be surprised to see them be brought into the draft. Here's what I don't know for sure, again, and that is that the aim is to come up with a product that which again satisfies the Fish and Wildlife Service. They're our audience here. I mean, they're really our audience, which makes us different than any other rulemaking I've been involved in. We're not necessarily having to convince LCDC as the state legislature one way or the other. We're having to convince this federal body. So if there were recommendations that to change the rules in a way that would make it less likely to pass muster with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, I don't know what the commission would do with that. I don't know whether they would be inclined to respectfully decline to include them or just what they would do. So, again,
And the hearing with the commission is?
the hearing will be on July 23rd in Burns, Oregon. It's scheduled to be run from 1 o'clock in the afternoon to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I believe. Although I suspect we won't turn anybody away. I mean, if there's more time, if it takes more time, I think we probably should take more time.
So, I think that's important to me, especially when I hear both Commissioner Kestner and Jamie mention that there was reluctance when you guys came to consensus. So I would think that alone says that other input should be considered, so I appreciate that. And I definitely hope the commission will consider that throughout there's 7 counties, I believe, that this impacts.
Right.
And so if when you go to your public meetings and you have other public meetings later on in July, I sure hope that it's considered some good things come forward.
I believe they will.
And that's partly why we're here today, trying to get, ahead of the hearings in July. And if we can uncover some things that can make this stronger, better, or, more acceptable to folks, we want to be able to do that. And I think that, if I can temper my comment just a tad about the reluctance, my understanding is the reluctance on the part of particularly the counties is just this sense that these aren't necessary, because we have a strong land use planning system. And so why are we having to do some additional regulations on top of that? And so I think that's there's always been that question out there, and it was a gap that was identified by Fish and Wildlife Service, really to provide consistency from county to county. So while individual counties are doing good things to steer development away, there isn't necessarily a way that that's codified and that's consistent from county to county. So that's what these rules try to do.
And that's a very important part. Over a year ago, at one of the commission SACON, we always have Fish and Wildlife Service present. They don't always join in. But if you got 7 different counties and 7 different emphasis of the planning commission and the commissioners, they wanted consistency. Because they said back in DC, they want to look at one set of one path as opposed to 7 different paths.
Yeah, and it's also good for the developer.
Just make a comment, one shoe doesn't fit all, I
Yeah.
fight this all the time with the state. What we have in Lake County is a lot different than what they have in Malheur County. We do both have habitat, our development, our highways, our power lines and everything is different. So as we give away some local control, when the rules like this that blanket the 7 counties, we're all counties, but we're all different. And even with the landscape and the habitat, much different terrains and everything, so I appreciate that they, U.S. Fish and Wildlife or DC or whoever wants it to blanket. I'm not sure that's always the best approach. That's a comment.
Well, that sentiment has not gone unnoticed.
Yeah.
And, you know, and also, it may not be the most apparent part of the rule. We have preserved, you know, the ability for a local government or county to establish its own program, should it think it, you know, it has circumstances where they could do, you know, an equivalent or better job than specified in the rule.
To customize it.
There's been that deliberate effort to keep that included.
So, you want me to just go through my questions?
Yeah,
Was
I
that
think that'd be
fine with everybody? And planning commission and
I
others?
had one that kind of fits what we're on right now, if that's
Okay,
okay.
that's perfect, Justin.
You're continually referring back to the 7 counties have one uniformed code that be in that, or plan a set of rules, I guess. But the decision from the service is on 11 western states. So on the other states, what kind of consistency are we seeing from the planning commissions and all those other areas?
So that's a really good question. I think that a common denominator seems to be the work that the BLM doing, you know, where they've been updating their resource management plans, and I don't know how many of them are doing, a lot. You know, so that is that's a pretty common denominator. We're also seeing our other states, involved states, doing similar efforts, not quite as extensive as Oregon is. There's been several executive orders passed, which is a tool that the states without the same sort of legal structure as Oregon has, administrative rules uses. Wyoming was one of the very first. You know, they've adopted some pretty aggressive strategies aimed at really quite severely limiting development within sections. 640 acre section is down to, I think it's 5% of the section, and really closes the door on a lot of development that Oregon would continue to entertain. Frankly, and very candidly, I think Wyoming's program is built all around preserving the ability for oil and gas exploration. And in doing so, they've just said, we're not going to do wind, we're not going to do solar, we're not going to do these other things. So that's a difference. You know, that state has done something. Oregon has kind of emulated the core area approach. Was originated, which you can see kind of the map that I want you to get up there. That kind of originated in Wyoming. We've used it as opposed to a left-based approach. So different people are doing different things, and so this is a pathway we've chosen in Oregon, and it fits kind of what we have, kind of our culture and our structure. So, but it does vary, and sometimes it varies kind of widely from state to state.
Well, I guess that's my concern with Oregon as a state, be it the planning or the CCAAs or the RMPs or the state lands, is that Oregon tends to set the bar, which is sometimes good and sometimes bad. If we set the bar on extremes and the bird is still listed because we've got 10 other states that aren't following, then we've just strapped ourselves down. Or just the opposite, it's not listed, and we've still strapped ourselves down with things more intense.
So that's it, and that again, that's something that wasn't ignored either.
Right.
You know, what do we? So what happens if, you know, let's say, you know, our plan A is to demonstrate that the listing is not necessary. Or plan B, should that fail, is to demonstrate that we deserve to basically continue to control our own destiny.
Right.
But what if we have to resort to plan C, whatever that is? or whatever, if something of that nature occurs, you know, we've written into the very last section of the rule where there are circumstances which the commission should consider whether or not to rescind the rule. You know, so for instance, and this is, we talked to Harney County about this.
It's on the last page, Commissioner Winters.
If the service lists the species and we don't get any special consideration, I don't think the state of Oregon, including my commission, has any intention of requiring the counties to handle a listing as well as this rule. I think in that, if that situation occurs, I think that a request to rescind the rule will resonate with my commission. Just as the same, this is brought up by the Baker County folks and their experience with the wolves. Well, what happens if the species is not listed?
Or delisted.
Or delisted, you know, do we retain this rule? Well, you know what, I think that's another instance where it could be considered. Now, what we don't want to do is if the service is making decisions that we want them to make, and part of that's predicated on the presence of this rule, we don't want to take that away and discourage them from doing what we want to do.
Right.
What we don't want to do is to have this rule serve as an unnecessary or extraneous set of regulations.
So from a planning perspective, if the species is listed and say there's some big development within core, does that become a consulting issue like a BA or a BO would be? Do we have to consult directly with the service?
Well, I think that if it's listed and there is no 4D rule, then I think there's a consultation requirement.
For every, yeah, that's what I mean.
If there's a listing and the rule's intact and we're under the 4D special treatment, this rule will apply. I don't believe there would be a consultation requirement.
And people understand about 4D rule, what that, no? It's basically if the bird is listed in all the other states, you know, if it's listed across the range, because of the good work we're doing here, because of the CCAAs, because of funding that we've allocated for conservation, because of the presence of these rules, we could negotiate with Fish and Wildlife Service to be accepted on that listing. And so that means that we have plans in place that satisfy their requirements, so then we're not subject to listing. So that's a good thing. So we're trying to line ourselves up to be in a strong position for that.
4D is a reference to a part of the actual act, the federal legislation. So it's that section which basically says, you know, it's not like you know more about it than I do, but it basically says that the service can enter into an agreement to basically agree to a management plan that substitutes for what they would do and allow a jurisdiction to execute that.
Yeah, similar to like a safe harbor agreement.
That's exactly right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's not new, there's a case of a 4D rule on the species over in the Willamette Valley
There are.
and in other parts. It's section 4, article D of endangered species.
That's right. That's right.
And the service, Fish and Wildlife Service, has been really helpful and very upfront with us about, you know, I mean, they can't tell us they don't know what their decision's gonna be, but they can let us know how we can position ourselves in the best possible way. And so, like, I mean, I appreciate what you're saying is, you know, we do tend to set the bar kind of high, and, you know, we're the only state that's doing the rulemaking in part because that's our mechanism to amend our land use planning structure, and we're the only state that has that. So, you know, we are having to do some things a little bit differently, and the other states are kind of looking at us thinking, you know, what are you doing? You're way out there in front of us, and it's just because of the mechanisms that we have in order to put in place the pieces that we need to make a strong case for the state.
And on that concern, it's been a concern of many of us on this HCON from the county aspect. But toward the end of, it does give that latitude to reconsider. Of course, you know, there'll be opposition from the other side of the coin against.
That's how you know you're doing something right, is if you're getting sued.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'm sorry I have to be at a different meeting, but thank you for answering
Yeah,
my
thanks for
questions.
sitting in that.
Thanks.
So be in touch with Darwin or
You bet.
you guys.
Think about the one in Burns.
Yeah, for sure, I'll send all the planning commissioner.
You'll be able to watch this on YouTube, Lake County Examiner, for
Okay.
what you missed.
Perfect. All right, thank you very much.
Is that a good plug for you, Jimmy?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
I have a question, Mr. Chairman.
There-
is there anything in what you're working on, or is it already locked in other legislation statewide? If we have a landowner who feels they've been wronged by what happens here and says, this is a taking, you've devalued my property, what are that person's options?
Well, so it's really, their options are no different than if they were to say that today. I mean, if they had first of all, I mean, it's a pretty strenuous test to demonstrate that you suffered takings. And in this rule, in my estimation, and in the estimation of the Department of Justice, does not constitute takings. If someone wanted to contend that, wanted to challenge that, they would file a lawsuit.
Deep pockets.
Yeah, so I think it would be, I don't think the process would be any different than if they wanted to claim that that they were suffering takings under the existing regulatory structure, and I honestly don't know if they'd file that in circuit court or federal court or where they would go with that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that some large landowner who maybe doesn't even live in Oregon wakes up one day and said, wait a minute.
Well, that's right, that we encounter that ever so often on all sorts of circumstances, but I don't think it changes the process. I have to admit, I'm not sure what that process is exactly, but, there's the legal system is intact, and I think they would avail themselves of that and see what happens.
And I guess there's already things in place as far as power lines and natural gas lines.
That's right.
If this is just two agencies are gonna go at it and see how if they can do it and if it can be mitigated.
Right. So that's right, and we can talk a little bit more. Actually, the power lines, both the power lines as well as the natural gas line are kind of a good example we can watch for some point. But I know Commissioner Winters had some more questions.
They've been talking about re-graveling underneath all their power lines. We know that from a previous application we just approved for a gravel pit, which was run by ODFW, and the local fellow said it was just fine.
Okay.
But the reason they're making a gravel pit up off of 395 at the humpback is because they're gonna be redoing gravel underneath their towers, I would assume, and probably the road to get to them. That's already disturbed land, so that it's, even though it goes through the areas that are gonna be set aside for the sage grouse, as long as they're not running over lakes, I guess it's grandfathered in.
I would think so. I mean, so we had this discussion just a little different way in Harney County and when the Rules Advisory Committee met in John Day, but that is that I think that type of activity in an existing right-of-way to an existing facility would be construed as maintenance and not a new use. And in fact, I think it's important to say that, to the extent that someone wasn't required to get a land use approval before these rules, should they come to be adopted, were adopted, nothing in these rules would require them to get a land use approval afterwards. So if we're talking about, basically resurfacing an existing road, an existing right-of-way under an existing power line, I think that's maintenance. I don't think it's a new road.
Okay.
And the gravel quarry, again, that was found to be okay, so that's,
But I can see somebody an adjacent rancher who says, well, I wanna build a road, and
well, so it depends on the type of road.
but they just built a road over here. No, it was already there, they're just improving it.
Well, so again, I mean, it depends on what kind of road you're building. If it's just a trail that you use to salt cows, you're not gonna come to, Darwin's not gonna have to approve that, and he wouldn't have to afterwards either.
Probably wouldn't know, yeah.
Yeah, why would you? I wouldn't.
Yeah.
Would you? I mean, that's your business. If he wants to build a toll road across his property that's 4 lanes and paved, that's something you're probably gonna have to talk about that.
Right.
Or if they're developing and putting another residence on their property and have to build a road into it, then planning commission would know.
Yeah, well, so in that instance, depending upon kind of where it was, there may be a conversation where ODFW would be asked to opine with regard, maybe they'd ask for a shared driveway or or give advice about the best place on the property. The problem with a home site, my guess is even in core habitat, this rule is really set up to talk more about how that happens and not whether or not it should happen. You know, so again, you might be asked to say, you know, could you site your driveway a little further this way or that way, or could you share a driveway, or could you put, you know, combine the locations of the home a little closer, or something like that. But I don't think the county would be put in a position to deny a proposal that they would otherwise be inclined to approve. You know, if we begin moving up the ladder and start talking about you know, larger types of activities that have more of a potential to fragment habitat and could have a potential conflict or greater potential for conflict with the species, then you know, things are going to get ratcheted up a notch. That's when we're moving into what we call large scale development. And we really worked hard on coming up with what the right or a reasonable definition for that would be. But basically, it's as large as you know, it is a transmission line. It's it could be a gravel quarry. You know, it could be a road. It could be, you know, something is fairly land intensive or tall or loud that has a real genuine potential to affect the species. But that's not a deal killer or a showstopper in every instance. What you have, what an applicant would have is their day to demonstrate why they selected the location they selected. This is why it has to be here. You know, I've chosen this location because this is the only place that there's uranium in Lake County. There's nowhere else to go, and that I'm minimizing my my operation by keeping the footprint small and you know, not hauling or stockpiling or crushing in March and April when the birds are strutting, and I'm also abiding by ODFW's compensatory mitigation requirements. So, County, why don't you give me a thumbs up on that?
I appreciate all that, and then I read development action, and then it talks about re-permitting and all those things, and so it opens up the door again for there to have to be mitigation under re-permitting and everything. So I appreciate what you're saying. I know the intent is there, but it's the reluctancy that we talked about earlier, is what doors are open for special interest groups, one way or the other, to appeal or to sue, and the county's gonna have to go by these.
Mm-hmm.
And so this will get to one of my questions. I'm way out of order, but conversation we did there. So if somebody does sue the county after our planning commission makes a decision, is the state going to cover that litigation?
It's not customary, the state would do that.
But this is the state's rule.
So, here, I guess what I would, first of all, I would say that a challenge of the county, so a challenge of the planning commission's decision would come to the county board of commissioners, and a challenge of that decision would go to the land use board of appeals. And it's not customary for the state of Oregon to become involved in those cases. However, it's not absolutely unprecedented either. You know, we have, in at least one instance, weighed in with an amicus brief in support of a county decision years ago on another county and another issue. But I don't think any real decisions have been made. If we believe the county was applying the rule correctly and responsibly, then I would like to think we'd be willing to put some of our money where our mouth is, and it would be worth it to us to create case law, or to help assisting create case law, to look, the county did this the right way. So, you know, I can't, that's about my pay grade to say, but I'd love, if it came to that, I would love to think we would do what we could.
What would it take for the counties to go above the pay scale to institute something?
Well, it would be putting language into this. It would be a recommendation from us through these processes and writing up something, submitting it in time before it goes before the commission so that they could evaluate it. But did you read, I know you didn't have a chance, I think Jamie did, on the development action and what that means with what you said. You know, we got over onto if you'd help cover the litigation, but that there says that if you re-permit something, let's say you're gonna build a garage and put a power pole into it, you have to go get a permit to do that. And somebody says that's gonna impact sage grouse because you're in core habitat, even though you've lived there for 20 years. Is that gonna push where that they're gonna have to mitigate the impacts on sage grouse?
Well, I don't,
And I'm being the extreme,
no,
the other side.
I know, that's right, 'cause that's where you need to be. So, re-permitting activities with new impacts or continued impacts or continued impacts that have not been. So first of all, let me just say this, let me say at the beginning that as you go through the definition portion of the rule, almost all of those have been borrowed directly from ODW. You know, so that was consistent with the thinking that to the extent that the same term appears in both rules, it
Well,
should.
I gotta stop you there. I appreciate that. But the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife is not a regulatory agency.
Well, I don't-
There's science we have to go by. We're a regulatory agency, so they don't have the same invested in it as what we do. So if you're plagiarizing what they've got, it doesn't always fit.
So, I'm not at all taking issue with that, I was just explaining that you'll see some tendency there.
So I guess what I'm saying, John, is if you're taking that from there, maybe it needs to be rethought of with a different view.
Well,
of what the
so I
counties
think
have to
that's
do.
where we're getting to, or we're hoping, because I think you're right. So I don't, re-permitting could mean a couple different things, I guess. It could mean an instance where, I think most likely in a county land use situation, it could very well mean where someone has come in and gotten their land use approval, and that approval has expired, and they're coming back in for another application. And in that instance, I think it's probably fair game to say, you know, you got your approval, you didn't act on it, so now we have to hold you to the rules that are in place right now. If it's a situation where someone has got their land use approval, their entitlement, and they're simply executing that, you know, I think that's off limits. I think they should be able to do what they were approved to do. Now, again, if they have that approval and they're asking for a change to that, you know, they say, well, first we wanted it this size, now we want it twice as big. You know, they're probably gonna be held to the new standard, but I don't think that this means, or it's not our intention that to hold someone in some sort of double jeopardy or.
So probably the clarification that could be there, guys, is definition of re-permitting. I went to structural re-permitting, which would be through our building department. If this is re-permitting on the land use, then what you say, John, makes perfect sense. But if just layman's reading of that re-permitting, I lump it all together. And if it's inclusive of building permits, then there has to be a trigger for our planning commission to know about that. So I think a clarification on the re-permitting and what that means, and it's limited to this, would be very helpful.
So I think that's a good comment, Commissioner, and we'll definitely follow it up.
Yeah, because of, I read it opposite of the way, you made a very good example. Somebody comes in and get a conditional permit, and it expires, well, then they're permitting that part. I think that's what it should pertain to.
Right.
And so I might have went too far the other side.
Well, so another example, I guess, and think about it is not necessarily permitting, but extending an existing approval. Again, I think that if you're operating in good faith, under existing code language, then I think you get to be protected by our, we call it goalpost rule. So if you're asking, say if your permit's good for 4 years with the option for 2 one-year extensions, and you come in a timely manner and file an extension, then again, I think you get to play by the rules that you started out under. So again, it's not, the intention not to shift anything right in the middle of somebody's program.
I gotta make this comment before I ask my questions. All along, from way back, and Commissioner Kestner's heard this in Darwin, is none of this should go forward until that map is corrected. I mean, I know that that's a wish. I think it's been said many times, probably throughout your meetings, But whenever you take a look at core there, and you look at, we have housing developments, we have right there, next Highway 31, look at all that there.
That's Summer Lake area.
Summer Lake area, that's in core habitat. Then you go on up to Lake Road up in Christmas Valley, where there's development up there, and it's in core habitat. So the owners of these properties now are not gonna be able to develop, or if they've already developed them, and they're under a lot stricter guidelines. If they're developed, need to be taken out of the core habitat. The sage grouse is not coming back and gonna live on your back doorstep. So the maps are just wrong in Lake County, speaking for Lake County. And I know and trust me, Oregon Fish and Wildlife, I give a lot of money to over my hunting years and everything. But they don't worry about the development like we do. They don't worry about economic development. They don't worry about living in a county that's 78% federally land owned and you got 22% taxation. So whenever you start taking away our ability, they start taking away our ability, and that map is accepted, our ability to grow has just become less, which means less taxation for us to be able to take care of our communities. And so, if that map's just completely wrong, and it needs to be completely reassessed, reconsidered with other eyes besides just Fish and Wildlife people. They don't look through the same eyes as we do. And it's not that us that represent counties, we're very protective of habitat. We're very supportive of keeping the sage grouse going. Examples would be here in Lake County and across many counties is the juniper removal. But in Lake County, and Darwin's been given the direction, any properties that come up for foreclosure in core habitat and possibly even in the general habitat, we're not selling. Because we're proactive. Sure. We're looking at how we're going to protect so Lake County is able to continue to develop and protect the sage grouse at the same time. So it's really not the counties against the sage grouse. It's how do we protect habitat and still build, develop,
Right.
and keep our communities healthy. So I just think the maps are, and I'm on my soapbox obviously.
Well,
I think
so-
the maps are completely outlined.
And Darwin has projected that point,
On day one.
from day one, and they will be up for review shortly. You know, I don't know exactly, but
Supposed to be 2016.
next year or so.
Which would be after the rule.
It would be after the rule, however, if those boundaries are changed, then I think we would need to make sure that any new and improved boundaries would also be subject to the rule, or would be swept into the rule.
Well, being a warrior, how much more are they gonna add? We're talking, we'd like to have less on there. How much is the Fish and Wildlife gonna say, okay, we've done more and we're gonna make these maps taking more core
If we're
habitat.
gonna start approving
Yeah.
places, development on places that are in that never land, and ODFW is gonna say, no, you can't, according to our map, we're gonna say your map's wrong.
Sure.
That's unnecessary friction. Who's got the purse strings on redoing that map? I'm just being blunt here, sorry.
The state of Oregon.
Yeah, that's ODFW. So they have it in their plan to update the maps every 5 years. And so they're on year 4 of, actually, yeah, they're supposed to be updated next
That's
year.
the same person who did some of the computer work for the state?
No, that's a different person.
Because it's wrong.
Yeah, it's a different person, and they're also putting in the ODFW rules, some more detail about how these will be updated, and we talked about these at the RACs, about having local involvement in the updating of the maps. Some way that's, so strengthening the LITs, the local implementation teams, which were put in place years ago to come up with these maps to begin with, but actually potentially expanding the LIT's role a little bit, having it be more inclusive. But then having the planning commissions have a role from county to county in terms of the maps coming to you, so that there's a public opportunity for people to come forward and say, you know, look at the maps and have a conversation, and to not necessarily adopt them, but have a vetting, you know, a local vetting process. so that it's consistent from county to county.
Yeah, and
Because we don't have that right now.
it's more transparent than the
It's
last.
more
than the last one.
transparent.
I mean, it wasn't, I don't think there's any, real intent behind, one way or the other, behind how those local implementation team meetings went. I went to a few of them, and maybe some of you guys did too, and, you know, what we found was similar to the way Judge Grassley described in Harney County, was basically a few civilians and a bunch of agency people. And that's kind of what I saw in the ones that I went to. The way I think that the could happen would be, again, more of a transparent and public process, that would allow, you know, different people to, you know, to weigh in. This issue, again, is, the issue of mapping is, the importance of updating mapping isn't isolated to Lake County. At least one other county that's been pretty bullish on the idea of.
So with the proposed rules, we have, this is developmental area, or it's a platted place. Have quite a few houses there, some seasonal, a lot of them year round. If somebody wants to build on one of those with these rules, are they gonna be able to?
Yes, so what I would say is that, first of all, this is still zone DFU though, right? Even though it's platted.
So it's one of those mapping things, it's a whole other issue. It is zoned EFU, but its comprehensive plan designation is farm residential,
Okay, so.
so we gotta get it fixed.
Well, so that's interesting. So let's just say, let's just play both sides. Let's say it's zoned farm residential, it's a rural residential zone. Those areas, even though they're mapped, would not be subject to the rule. We've specifically called out lands that are not protected under, as farm or forest land.
Even in core.
That's it.
Even in
Yep.
core, that's right. So Christmas Valley, you know, you guys don't have a lot here in Lake County, honestly, but, so they would not, those would not be subject to the rule. If they are, then,
This would be another one of those areas where.
yeah, so let's say this area, I don't know, is pink low density or corridor?
Yeah, it's low.
So it doesn't matter, it's fine, it would be the same way either way. So let's say you got that area down there, where those, well, it looks like a bunch of 20s to this, so anyway, anywhere within those areas, where someone was interested in building a non-farm dwelling or a farm dwelling, most of your applications, I think, or a lot of them in that North County is non-farm dwellings, right? So what you would do is the Darwin, someone will come to the county, Darwin said, hey, you know what, you're in sage-grouse, you're in significant sage-grouse habitat, why don't you talk to an EFW? They'd probably go down and talk to Craig Foster, and he might come out, and they might walk around, and he might say, yeah, you know, there is a lek over there, but it's on the other side of the ridge or whatever, so you know, you don't need to worry about that. Or he might say, well, you know, we would just as soon see you put the house on this side of the property as opposed to that side of the property. So what we would expect, if it's within, you know, the distances that are prescribed, it may not, you know, but if the distance is prescribed within the proximity of the lek, there would be a conversation that could result in some siting stipulations, but I don't think more than that. So the short answer to the question is yes, they could develop it. Second answer,
With potential mitigation.
with some potential mitigation type activities or not. You know, again, that's going to be the call of the local biologist, which I think has been important to Commissioner Kestner. Because if they go out there and say, okay, well, we're in core habitat, you're within 4 miles of the lek, and they come out there and they say, you know, okay, yeah, but in our judgment, you're really not constituting a threat. Therefore, we're willing to put that in writing, send it to the Planning Commission, Darwin puts it in the record, and the Planning Commission moves forward as usual. Or it may say, you know what, we'd like to see you do it this way, put that in writing, so on and so forth.
So it's
So
not
it's
as
much
simple
like
as
the
when I
mule deer
first-
corridors.
I think it would probably operate very similar to that.
So it wasn't as simple as your first answer was, yes, you can build in this place. The rules do apply, and the rules do apply by either mitigation or whatever. If you're in core habitat, even though it's a platted area,
Right. Unless,
before you build, you have to get permission.
As long as
to
it's-
build within the scope of the rules with input by the local.
If it is zoned for exclusive farming use or forest use, like it would be all if you out here, then there is a process you would engage in. That process is deliberately designed to be for these smaller things, these non-large scale development things, to be about how it happens and not whether or not it should happen.
Okay.
So that's the way I like to frame it in my mind.
Yeah, the biggest concern I have with these is the LIT team, all the sage-grouse collections are on the east side. That yellow is Picture Rock Pass, Highway 31, there's no Lex on the other side. They just do a circle by a computer. Haven't been a wildlife biologist. If you just do a computer jockey, you get exactly what we had down there in the Summer Lake area. The team needs to form it up and critique it. However, that would be next year before they ever get there. If the sage grouse is listed, per chance, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will accept de facto this map as being a
Say, hey,
habitat.
Mom, I can see our house.
And that's where my emphasis, if we can get a 4D rule, it gives us more flexibility statewide to do our own management.
Right, and as those maps are updated.
Otherwise, if we don't get a 4D rule and it's listed, the grouse is, you had to have a biological opinion to pee behind a tree out there. And you know how long that'll take, 120 days plus another 6 months.
Yeah.
Any project would die on the vine by the time they get there. So it's convoluted. If we can get the map cleaned up, if we get the 4D rule, if the owl, not the owl, I went through this spotted owl. If the grouse is listed, we need something strong enough that we get a 4D rule. But the overall objective is to have it not listed.
That's right, that's exactly right.
So my next question is, that I read through here, and I believe it's intentionally put pretty generic. The mitigation is pretty, there isn't no real definition of mitigation.
So,
And so my question is whenever these things are mitigated, is there a place at the table during mitigation for our planner or for the county to be at the table? Because of whenever, if our planner is gonna be presenting to the planning commission about the mitigation, they need to be part of the questions, part of the solution. I guess if it's just ODF and W doing the mitigation, they may not have, like I said, the same views as development or the county, those different things. So I would like to see in here someplace it written in that the counties are at the table during the mitigation process. I think it's important because everything we've just talked about, and Ken just mentioned it, is we add more and more rules and more things on. When somebody comes in here to develop, even if it's just a house, and now it's got to mitigate a little bit of it, these guys sitting as a planning commission have the frustration of these people coming in. It's gonna be another 120 days, it's gonna be another 30 days. So if we can streamline that and get him or whoever in the mitigation process, it might speed it up. I just think.
well,
it's
so that's a good point too, and again, it's not one that we haven't heard before. I guess what I have been thinking is that, because of the responsibility for ODFW to put that together, I'm wondering if that isn't something that's just as important to raise to them and as part of their rulemaking. We've been reluctant to try to make I've been reluctant to try to write rule language that would obligate ODFW and vice versa. Darwin highlighted some language
Well,
here.
why not obligate them? We're having to go by their dadgum map.
Because I don't want to obligate me. Darwin's highlighted some language
You're
here.
obligating the county with this rules. Now if we're gonna be a team, let's bring everybody to the table.
Well,
And
that's
there you
fair.
go, look at that right there.
And so we've written in this pre-application language, so the intention there is everybody gets together, at least the applicant, the county, and local ODFW staff. It could be other.
So this isn't in the rule, this is
This
This
is,
is-
So that's
this
in
is- this is
page
the rule.
4 about
page
middle,
4. I'm looking-
Lines.
number 8.
I'm
So-
looking by my number 10.
What the expectation is here is that You know, this would be, three things would happen. The applicant would present, kind of the essence of their proposal, what they're looking at trying to do. You know, the county would help identify the applicable planning and zoning standards, those regulations, and ODFW would listen to both of those, as well as present their expectations about any compensatory mitigation requirements. So everybody's on the same page. We used the term should as opposed to shall, we didn't want it to become a procedural issue and get someone hung up over it, but that's what we think is gonna happen. I mean, they'll launch by conversation. I think the county would be, at that point, your representative, I think Darwin would be there, he would listen to what Craig Foster had to say about what they were expecting about compensatory mitigation, if that's required. So certainly there would be an intersection at that point. Now, I know that's not quite the same thing as having the county's representative involved in identifying and settling on a compensatory mitigation strategy. But certainly, the county's in the loop on how that moves forward.
Well, the burden's on the county. You didn't want to put the burden on the ODFW, but the burden is the county should convene. So if we don't convene and we make a land use decision and somebody comes in, they say, you didn't do, it says here you should, the county's the one that's going to be taking the task, nobody else.
And that's why we didn't use the term shall. Because I think the expectation is this will happen, and this should and will happen, but, if it doesn't, or if it occurs as a phone call, or as a conversation over the counter, like a conversation that happens probably every day in Darwin's office, then someone couldn't come back and say, well, where's the record of that?
Are you comfortable with it should being in there?
Yeah,
Because it'll
that's-
come back, the bills come to us after you.
Yeah,
If
and
it's-
again, I think just because you didn't have a pre-application conference doesn't change the fact that there's still gonna be a hearings process for any of these large-scale,
Okay.
actions. And so there's still gonna be notices going out and,
If you're good with it, we can. move
Well, I
on.
think that there will be, and again, why we didn't use, if someone calls foul because the county, it says should and the county didn't, well, that's discretionary. You may or you may not. You get to decide whether you should or you shouldn't. If you use the term shall, and they cry foul, well, you know what, then that might become a procedural issue that can get hung up
That's a
on
bigger
appeal.
issue.
So we didn't wanna do that.
And the other piece, just to clarify, because we did talk about this a lot in Harney County earlier today, is that when we use the word mitigation, so the intent also of this pre-application conference is to apply the mitigation hierarchy, which includes, is there an opportunity to avoid sensitive habitat? Let's look at the map together. Is there a way to minimize the development, like the examples that John was talking about? Or, if neither of those can be satisfied, then what might the compensatory mitigation requirement be? So I think the intent is that conversation would occur in that pre-application conference. So there's two kinds of mitigation that's being applied. Can it be moved away, minimized, or is there some money that you need to pay in to offset your impacts?
Yeah, the mitigation, it depends on where it's at.
Right.
and everything. And it sounds like there's quite a few, it even talks about compensatory mitigation. So I can move on, I'm good on that. I'm trying to cross between the ODFW and the state rules, and I'm trying to get to disturbance and what is disturbance. And concern is what you probably heard this a whole lot of Mount here or Harney County, is fire.
Yep.
We're so lucky we haven't had that major fire here yet. But if I look in the ODF&Ws, and we got we're supposed to be 78% or 72% sagebrush and 28% disturbed habitats. I believe in here when it's talking about disturbed, that fire should be exempt because it's out of the control of the counties or anybody.
So here's how I would put that, here's how I think about it. Fire is a disturbance.
Absolutely.
It is not an anthropogenic disturbance.
Unless
human caused
Unless
development.
it's human caused.
So for purposes of our rule, and I think LDF&W's, you know, we're not looking at fire. We're looking at disturbance from anthropogenic activity, human caused,
Permitted uses.
yes, and direct and indirect impacts. So we thought because the term disturbance is used later on in the rule, we thought I felt it was okay to leave it in there, but it needs to be clear, you know, we're not counting fire acres, we're not counting juniper invasion, we're counting only those types of land use activities that are currently regulated, or currently require review, and are considered large scale. And that's what we're counting. We're looking at at some other things too below that in certain areas, but really focusing on bigger land use activities.
So can we, I understand that's the intent. Once rules are in place, then they will be changed and there'll be more added. Very rarely does it go away, it usually gets stricter. My concern, my opinion. But is there any way under disturbance that fire can be excluded?
So if you look on page 2, 5F, the definition of disturbance, it does say is natural and anthropogenic activities, and then the second sentence of that section says, for purposes of this rule, only disturbance from anthropogenic activities are considered. So that's,
But I think,
so I think what you're saying should be stronger than that.
so I think what we don't want to have someone argue is it was a human caused fire and therefore it's anthropogenic. So, you know, what we could do, we could say something like disturbance is natural, i.e. fire, and anthropogenic activity. Do something to make sure that fire is not something that is accountable under this rule.
It's really out of all of our control, fire is.
Yeah.
And that's consistent with everybody's perspective on it. We're not talking about fire. We're not talking about that. We're not counting that towards the 3%.
We don't want the fire, but
Yeah.
it's gonna happen
Yeah,
someday.
that's right.
And so it's quite a concern. So I would like to see a little bit stronger language that excludes fire, you know, unnatural fire behavior or something like that. I don't
Yeah, well, I think that would be I think that'd be improvement, and I think that'd be wholly consistent with where
Yeah.
everybody else is going.
Let me see here. And I think it's in here someplace. I'll ask you guys. Is there anything, I think it's in here, ag exempt, cattle exempt, or there?
Right up front.
Right up front, isn't it? I thought I'd read it.
Yeah, number
Yeah.
15, this is
Line
number
15.
2, yeah, line 15, number 2, exempt activities,
There you go, thank you. I knew it was in there, but I wrote it down while we were talking
yeah.
to make sure.
And you can thank Farm Bureau, Mary Ann Nash, for coming up with some language and really making sure that we pulled it up front, so it was very clear, so there was no question.
I know that years ago, that was a concern of a lot of people, was
Yeah.
just being able to manage their own properties, so that's good.
Right.
There's nothing in here, anyplace, and I'll get on my soapbox again, there's nothing, and this would be the ODF&W side, so I'm not talking right here about predators. We have one of the worst examples in the world with spotted owl. We lost our logging industry, we protected all this land, everything went sideways. Now we have scientific take of the barred owl, which is shooting with a 12-gauge shotgun, that's called scientific take, and the spotted owl is still declining. And I'm just on my soapbox, it can't be the state rule, but if predators aren't looked at on the safe grouse, all of us are gonna be in trouble. And so we all ought to, we're all at the same table, we should be considering that. That's part of all of it, if we're going to try to protect habitat and try to keep the bird from being delisted. Predators are a big problem, very big problem.
The state of Wyoming have instituted a predator control with the blessings of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
And I'm on my soapbox, I don't believe in managing land for one species, and that's what this has pushed us to. It's ridiculous. At the expense of any other species we can manage to one, I don't agree with that. I believe we have healthy good habitat for all. But anyway, I'll get off my soapbox.
No, those are, so again, those comments, some of them are more accurate, put to DPW, but, you know, they're not lost on us either, I appreciate that.
Well, you have the screen up there, and soon we'll discuss on the meetings I missed, 7, 8, and 9, the format 4.0 and the 3.1. My last engagement, ODFW was looking at 3. Where did it creep to .1? And where did it creep to 4?
So what, the information that we received back from the ODFW biologists was that based on their literature search and experience, that was 4 miles. 4 miles was the distance from those most important areas, where most of the birds that use those lakes nest within 4 miles in 4 habitat. And in a lower density habitat area, it was a variation from 3.1 was the bottom of that. I mean, it was like 7 to 20 something to 3.1. And so we picked 3.1. I think at one point, just for simplicity's sake, people may have said 3 miles. But I think what they really have meant all along was a 3.1 mile. And that's a distance that where 75 or 80% of the birds that use that lake are expected to nest within that distance.
I assume the .1 is just a finessing the number, but 4 miles caught me off guard.
Yeah, so
And-
4 miles.
I'm sorry, I can't keep my mouth.
No, go ahead.
I appreciate
It's here for
4
you.
miles, but is that from the center where the wreck is, 4 miles each direction, which means 8? And do they all disperse that evenly, or do they all sort of nest in one general area? Which makes you wonder, you know, the habitat isn't, the 4 mile circle isn't all prime
No, that's
nesting
right.
habitat.
So that's exactly
So-
right. And
I
I think that's an unknown. But that's, our expectation is that when those, you know, when those lands subject to proposal are looked at or ground truth by local biologists, they could reach those conclusions based on the situational characteristics. And those distances, you know, are mostly indicative of when a smaller activity, a non-large scale, you know, a dog kennel or more like a home occupation or again, a non-farm dwelling or something like that, would necessitate a conversation between, you know, further conversation with the applicant and the county and ODFW. And it wouldn't really be about whether or not you could do it, it'd be about how you might do it.
I was really hopeful that ODFW is gonna be here today. I assumed they were, so that's
Well, you know,
my
and
mistake.
I'll take the blame for that, to tell you the truth. I had thought to let them know, but I didn't.
Well, I'll take blame. It crossed my mind yesterday, and then I got busy on something else.
Yeah,
But
so
it gives me a great opportunity to beat him up.
Yeah.
So, I'd beat him up if it's here, but on that, and the nesting, maybe they should have looked at where the water source was, and their nesting's gonna be within pretty close to those areas. And maybe you don't just take and draw a map and say it's gonna be 4 miles, they're gonna nest 4 miles out in core habitat and go with 3.1 in low density. I think that they could have narrowed it down and probably got, they are biologists and educated in it and figured out where the nesting areas was. And so we got these big circles, that's all inclusive. Bothers me.
So here's a good example. You know, I think that, you know, you can see the topography there. Those little, the squares are the lakes, right?
Yeah.
You know, and I don't know if this is biologically sound or not, but, you know, you say if you're looking at something that's down by Highway 31, you know, it may be within that distance of the lake, but based on the topography, you know, it may not be unreasonable for someone who knows what they're doing to say, yeah.
Or is that a building?
No, and then I've got houses, like address plots
Okay,
on
that's
as well.
house, okay.
Yeah, so I can turn those off.
So, I mean, it may not be unreasonable, and it would be a judgment call that the field biologist could make,
I-
is that, you know, based on the orientation here, there are no impacts. And so this applicant does not need to go any further in the considerations for safety grounds.
And if I can, even to state it even more simply, so so what you're looking at here with these numbers, these are all associated with just Lex.
Right.
So not nesting habitat at all. And it was in recognition by the RACs that the Lex really do represent the, kind of the best habitat, kind of regardless of where they are,
habitat.
the critical
The
habitat,
richest.
yeah,
Yeah, but from the Lex, the nesting goes out 4 miles.
Right.
From the
possibly,
Lex- well,
in
that's
the
what
core
I just heard,
area.
wasn't it? Isn't that what you just said? And that's the way they came up with the
Yeah,
4 miles,
yeah.
is be from the Lek, 4 miles out is
Yeah.
nesting, right? So go 4 miles from the Lek and you
Make
make
a
that
circle.
circle, that makes
It
8
does,
miles across.
it does, yeah, but as you pointed out, and I think as we would find, is that not all of that area is created equal.
Right.
You know, if it's a straight line on level ground or, you know, an at-site view, okay, that's one thing. If it's, you know, if it's not, then there's the latitude for that call to be made, and then, you know, the decision that there is no, you know, Darren's really got that.
So
That's really pretty persuasive there.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
great
You know,
example.
that if you were gonna do something on that pivot, or whether put a home there or put a, you know, commercial activity in conjunction with farm, you sell hay or something.
Yeah, it's got a little shack on it.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't.
It's an old farmstead.
Well, if it's a shack, it's, you know, if it is just a shop or a barn that wouldn't require a permit anyway, wouldn't come to the planning commission anyway, you're fine. You know, but if it's something, you know, like a commercial activity in conjunction with farm use or something like that, it may not be unreasonable. I would, in that instance, I don't want to speak as I'm not a biologist, but it looks like, it would be hard to find that something going on down there by Highway 31 would have
Yeah,
the potential to impact something going up on that rim. But, and again, the local biologist would have the discretion to do that. Yeah, no problem.
That was a-
1,000-foot difference in elevation.
There was a strong emphasis to pull the ODFW as the deciding factor on the biological side, because U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service would look at the state Fish and Wildlife as the authority, as opposed to LCD being the authority on the biological.
Right, well, we're not biologists, we're not, yeah, there's certainly not other.
Now there's,
we regulate their good
Yeah.
science.
now there is a concern. We have Craig Foster, he's very pragmatic. He look at things, said, he's not about a book. I haven't encountered too many specialists who are about a book. The book says, he'll take what a book says and says it's applicable or it's not applicable. Now, there is a concern that we might get a young upstart from San Francisco that is book learned. But it's better to have the agency as the authority, recognizing there can be some pitfalls here and there, but, you know, Paul's gonna retire someday.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we can kick the new one into shape and whatever.
He's not far away from
But it's critical to have the ODFW as the biological authority being recognized by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
I'm beating up Fish and Wildlife a little bit, and Fozzie come talk to me.
Yeah.
How do they count the birds? And what kind of disturbance is that?
How do they disturb when they count them?
Helicopters are pretty disturbing.
yeah, they do the aerial counts.
And one of the major leks, we drive
Yeah.
out on the county road and watch them from the county road. That's a prime example with a power line not far away. It hasn't disturbed them too much. I understand, right, where the leks are and things, and we don't want huge development and everything, but there is examples of that there has been disturbance, and the birds continue to thrive and do well.
So there is, that's right. And I think some people might say that the reason that is because the amount of development in that area hasn't reached a critical threshold to to really make it more challenging for the species to survive. And that's what we don't want to do. We don't want to entertain more development than can be sustained by the species.
ODFW uses helicopters to survey peregrine nest falcons nest on cliffs. And that's right up in the face type
Yeah.
disturbance.
Yeah. So, and Commissioner Winters, I did talk with Chip Dale about coming here. We all had the same idea about the same time.
Yeah.
And so Chip and I emailed back and forth, and he's very interested and willing to come out and do the same kind of sit
It's
down.
scheduled for the 30th.
Good, yeah, and so we had talked about coming out. So I told him we'd probably talk some about him here, and we would take good notes.
Yeah. But I'll also share the same as Commissioner Winters on ODFW being, oh, we're not regulatory, we can't do anything. I do have the emphasis to try to move that agency, and I'll speak to the commission at the time, a step higher in involvement, as opposed to just saying, we're not regulatory. That they need to be a greater player at the table.
I've just heard that at one time too many when it comes to certain things.
Yeah, it's two sides, three sides to every coin, some pluses, some minuses, and then a neutral side.
And Commissioner Winters, can I clarify one other thing too, maybe for our planning commissioner, folks who might be watching this? When we're talking about the 4 miles and the 3.1 miles, one of the areas of confusion is people think that that's a buffer, that means that nothing can happen, and that's not what we're talking about here. And I want to make sure that people really understand that these areas trigger a review. They trigger this pre-application sit-down to figure out what's going on in there and what can or can't happen. So I just want to make sure that nobody walks out of this room thinking that.
Absolutely, appreciate the clarification, because I'm talking worst case scenario, that's what we're talking
Yeah.
today, so thank you so much for that.
Well, especially when you've got a 2,000-foot cliff and a highway.
Right.
Yeah.
And a power line runs right south of that one he was just showing you with the pivot and the old shack on it. There's so many mitigating factors around it, not mitigation.
Right, now I understand.
Mitigating, that it's just something else to consider.
Yeah.
If it's gonna be where those things already are, it's not gonna hurt anything that hasn't been already hurt.
Yeah, it's already,
And if there's still a light there and it's still active.
yeah.
Those are active up on top.
Yeah.
And that's
Mary Jo goes to,
exactly why we need.
and it isn't a county road that you can look at from. That's a hike to get it.
If you go down the county road, then you get into the.
Those ones up on top of the rim, there's no road up there.
There's one that goes into Squaw Lake,
Yeah.
right there.
Yeah,
But the
Goes all
usage
the way
on that
across,
is
comes over
about
on the lake-
3 or 4
Lake
years.
Road on Christmas Valley.
But that was the emphasis, is to have this review by the local ODFW to apply the practicality to it.
That's exactly.
So,
My emphasis, example I used, you have the outer 4-point or whatever as a trigger point, but if the project is nothing more than putting a chicken coop, the ODFW could say, oh, within a quarter mile you can do it. It's the magnitude of the project that actually presses outward on that 4-point mile.
yep. So, July 21st, you're here at the Memorial Hall.
What if it doesn't?
ODFW is here. So, you guys won't be.
Well, yeah, I'm gonna try to come down for that, but
I'll
it'll
be
be
there.
their show, and Jamie will be running that
I'll be running that meeting.
meeting.
Okay, so that's, what, so it's their show, what is it that local input can be? Are they just saying what?
So what they will be doing, I believe, is, maybe Jamie, you're gonna run
Yeah.
the meeting, well, you
So-
tell them what's gonna go on.
So they're gonna have
We
two,
have a planning commission.
so Fish and Wildlife Commission is required to have 2 public hearings in the range. And so that's what these satisfy. So one will be July 21st in Lakeview here, the other is July 22nd in Burns. They're both 7 to 9. And it's ODFW's show to basically go over the draft rule and answer questions and gather input on that. And then their commission meeting will be July 27th in Salem, where their commission will be considering the rules. The LCDC.
July when?
July 27th in Salem. LCDC will be meeting in Burns on July 23rd as a commission. They're scheduled a 2-day commission meeting, and the rules are scheduled to be heard at, from 1 to 4 on the 23rd in Burns. And so that will be the hearing and the consideration of the rules by the commission.
So, we have your guys' rules, we have ODFW's rules that you're trying to mirror each other. I brought up things today I'd like to have changed in your rules. Example would be the disturbance and the fire. Let's say, you guys say, that makes sense, that it should be excluded. A lot of ODF and W doesn't.
So,
I think, I think that if there are instances where there are, specific changes necessary to kind of harmonize the definition with the relevant rule, I don't think that's really a huge problem. I don't think it's really probably a problem at all. If we were to have dramatically different definitions for big ticket items like large scale development or something like that, that would be a problem. I think if we were looking at, if we're looking at something like you'd mentioned, the disturbance or, disturbance, and we wanted to make sure that it was clear that this rule did not consider fire. I know even though you say, well, we think we're okay. I don't think that's a problem. I think we can accomplish that.
I got a question on page 6 and on page 7. Just for my clarification, I don't really want to bring up the one on page 6 because I like what it says. But I have to. About halfway through number 12, especially unique local economic opportunity, that paragraph basically says if we have a substantial economic opportunity, we can go forward with it. But about mid-paragraph, the county should make this balancing determination only when the proposal involves an economic opportunity that will provide a number of permanent full-time jobs. What's the definition of number?
So,
Is one.
well, so I guess I had intended that to work together, that sentence be read in its entirety. So the number means, in my way I would say it, the number is consistent with the number of whatever it takes to increase the total amount by 0.5%.
Okay. Component.
Yeah, so that number would be for a full-time job, not including construction activity, paying with 100% of county wages sufficient to increase the amount of total private non-farm payroll employment by at least 0.5%. Well, the figures. That's the number, which is going to vary from county to county, and in Lake County, I think that's about 5.
That 150% goes right along with the enterprise zone.
That's why I was
yeah,
picked.
yeah.
That's exactly why I was picked.
And this is a good example, this number 12, of something that the county's really lobbied for and got into the rule. There's a number, the pre-application conference is another, there's a number of places where county input was directly just put right into the rule. And this was one that really basically spoke to that, hey, if there's a once-in-a-lifetime economic opportunity that's a big lift for our county, for our state, we want to be able to consider that. So we want to have that opportunity to do that. And we had a lot of conversation in the last meeting about that, and kind of went around, and by and large, people settled on, yeah, we want you to have that opportunity.
Yeah, and that was frankly, it surprised me a little bit, the willingness of the kind of the environmental community to talk about it. Their concerns have, in my estimation, have more to do with not wanting to create an opportunity for mischief. I felt like they were bought in on the notion, if there's a once in a decade or once in a generation opportunity out there, we should be doing what we can do to make that happen.
And the state should be stepping up to help
Yeah.
make that happen too.
I would think in counties that have gold and those type of things where there can be landscape gold mining and stuff in the desert, probably that applies to them quite a bit. Because they have large-scale development happening as far as open up large pits for gold, I would think. We have potential up here in the hills, not in Sagebrush.
So what I would say, Commissioner, is I would think that if you have a gold deposit, if you're like Calico Project and Grassy Mountain and in Malheur County, I think you can show that you're locationally dependent on that site, because there's not a lot of other gold sites available.
Yeah.
So I think you can make your case on that basis.
Good point.
It could be something different, it could be something we haven't even imagined yet. You know, maybe that something could go somewhere else, but they really like this spot. Maybe it's because the guy who invented the gadget lived there, who knows? But if it's a really important and desirable opportunity, then this gives the county, every once in a while, on a limited basis, the ability to waive the avoidance test. And not have to ask them why they can't go somewhere else. You know, they would still have to do the other pieces, but, you know, the avoidance test is really the tough one to crack. So they could get a buy on that.
Yeah, the county's, and led by Judge Christ, who hammered economy.
Right.
Yeah,
I think you
they
can
really
water
do.
down the environmental.
Well, I think I don't know that it wore them down as much as it sort of
Opened
raised their
their eyes.
their consciousness, you know, it's just like, we need to understand when, you know, if the counties are gonna be taking this on, what the other side of that is, and we need some help to make sure that,
Basically, we have to have an opportunity to make a living
Yep.
the same as the people in the metro area
Yes.
does.
That's right.
and we made I think one of the learnings that John and I were talking about from everybody on the racks was that none of this can work if we don't have viable communities. I mean, you hear from the federal agencies all the time that they need partners, there's not enough dollars. So those partners are in this room, they are these communities. If we don't have viable, thriving communities, we don't have partners to manage the landscape.
And if you don't have partners, you don't have ownership in protecting the grouse.
Right.
And that has its own ramifications.
So we've been talking a lot about that, and I think we just need to continue to.
The other little thing on page 7, number 14, landscape level disturbance, the last sentence, consistent with the federal science concerning the relationship between anthropogenic disturbance and sage grouse. The department, meaning LCD,
Yes.
will monitor, da.
Correct.
The consistent with the federal science, to my past history,
What would you like it to say?
my past history is that the environmental group can pick and choose what scientific study they want to make a case, and vice versa. I keep going back to my emphasis that ODFW be in the authority to provide the scientific.
So this.
That just popped out through my past history.
Yeah, and I think that's good. So when we get into these later, sections, most of these were written, or at least started to be written by Richard Whitman. And so I just took what he had left. And I can only imagine, I have to hazard a guess, he wrote it very fast, and didn't have a lot of time to sift through some of this. So there's better, so rather than saying, you know, and what he's getting at, consistent with available science concerning the relationship. So what he's talking about is the Connect study. And I think that's what he's talking about. Maybe we should just reference that study, or maybe we should
That's what
reference
study?
the Connect.
Connect.
Yeah.
Or what if it said consistent with available science accepted by the state?
But,
And that gives,
Yeah.
because then you're
Some-
not getting in that best available science fight.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, my
Which is what
emphasis
you're
is
trying to
tie
avoid.
it back to, my
The
emphasis
state.
is U.S. Fish and Wildlife is their authority. They recognize that the state DFW as the authority. Tie it so that the ODFW is the one that provides that best science.
Okay.
Too many lawsuits been lost in Ninth Circuit courts.
Yeah, I think
With
that's,
competing
I
bodies.
think that's an easy fix. I don't think that would, get anybody worked up at all. So I think we can certainly work on that.
Yeah, it should be easy, just insert something with ODFW.
So concerns that we brought forward today, do we need to get those to you guys in writing?
So-
Are you gonna carry them forward? And if you carry them forward and they can be changed, are you going to coordinate? And I'm run right back to the disturbance and fire with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, because your rules is on the 23rd, their rules on the 27th.
Right.
And which is actually, hate to say this out loud, a short time in government.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's really short. It's very short.
Yeah.
So, it would, it'd probably be useful for me, probably helpful for me, if you could get those jotted down and, I mean, you could even have, I mean, Darwin could write an email and say, you know, dear John, or like Board of Commissioners has requested I send you this, these are comments or whatever. And that way I'll have a record, we'll have a record of that happening. And then what I can do, I'll go through those and where I think that, we can make the adjustments, that are, those being non-substantive. I'll consider whether just to make those, or if they're a little more substantive in nature, you can identify that the request has been made, and we can offer a recommendation over whether or not to accept it or not, which is how we've done it in the past, with the commission's worked pretty well for us. And I think we've heard, you know, from what I've heard today, it sounds pretty solid, you know, so I think we'd be inclined to I don't know why we wouldn't be inclined to dismiss anything that the county's brought up. I think they're all pretty good, pretty solid recommendations.
Was there any changes that you jotted down, that potential changes that Harney or any other county brought forward to your proposed rules that you believe is gonna be changed?
Well, let me go through here.
And there's no reason to double over it.
No, so here's what I would probably do too, is, you know, I would you know, I don't have any, I'll have to go back and look at this, but I don't have any real solid examples of
I
Harney
mean,
County.
we make more recommendations than Judge Grassley.
Well, so
Well, they brought up more global concerns.
yeah, I would say that's right, and more global issues, as opposed to.
So a couple of the ones that came, that on my notes say, there was concerns about making sure that we're clear about how disturbance is calculated, or the
Yeah.
methodologies for calculating disturbance, and that, you know, that's really clear. Right, the RAC, the Rules Advisory Committee, recommended in the state rule that we go with the similar methodologies to BLM, because there's so much, you know, same land. If we want to do a finer scale that we've been talking about, a finer scale mapping as a part of the county's program, we certainly have the ability to do that, and that would give the counties a better tool to be able to work with an applicant and the agencies to fit things through sensitive land. So but that's something we don't have to do right now. So they did bring up that.
A couple of things I have, you know, for example, on page 2, line 3 and 4, direct impact. The term fish and wildlife habitat is used, and Judge Grassley would feel more comfortable if it said sage grouse habitat. He emphasized importance for county involvement in the mapping product in page 3, lines 27 to 30. Although he agreed that, you know, that's hopefully covered and may not need to be directly called out there, I think. I mean, little things like that. I mean,
There was a question
Yeah.
about our corridors defined,
yeah,
or, you know,
yeah.
our corridors mapped, are they kind of
Yeah.
another subset of habitat? So there's some questions about corridors.
So most of these, I mean, most of those, in terms of really specific recommendations about the rule, at this point, I think I'd be inclined to view as clarification and improvement on what it is that we're trying to accomplish. And I would say they're not substantive. They don't change the intent. They kind of hone the language to express the intent better. So I might just be inclined to put together a draft eventually for the commission that would just include, just fold those into it. Or on the alternative, I could say, here's recommendations that we've received, and, you know, we recommend accepting the non-substantive changes, and here's the substantive ones, and here's where we're recommending on that, things like that. But I think the commission would be real amenable to considering, you know, any of the comments that any of the counties or other parties would be interested in offering that.
I've taken most of the talking time. Darwin, our planning commission, do you have questions or things that you might see you want changed or comments?
Clarified.
Ken and I both were a part of this, so.
Good.
You know, we've made comments and suggestions, but, I think, you know, the ultimate goal is being addressed, which is trying to get this board not listed. And, you know, when it comes down to it, for me, it's always about ground truthing, so, you know, as long as, you know, Judge Grass, he isn't here to say this, but, you know, what development, and so,
Who had heard that today?
I
Yeah.
know you have, so I thought of it a few times, but, you know, when the planners did our report, you know, on the 10-year study of what development's happening in these areas, I mean, it showed virtually nothing. And so, you know, are we having, you know, large-scale development companies or, you know, individuals come forth and say we wanna go in some of these areas? No, and because probably for the most part, most of them have already known that it was core habitat or low density, and so, you know, a lot of the wind, companies have already said, no, we're not gonna go off the flush cutoff road, because we know it's cut off, you know, it's you know, core habitat. So a lot of that's not happening. A lot of the development we're seeing for our county at least is happening in areas that are already not habitat, so.
His comment's so true. The other side of that is how do we attract development here as there's more and more regulations coming upon us? Not becoming attractive for people to develop within Oregon or even on the east side. There's so many regulations and things starting to come in. It's getting enacted all from land use to minimum wage to sick leave for 10 or more employees. I mean, it's getting tough, and I always talk on Oregon, but it's getting tough to make it attractive to entice development here. So
And that's what.
I'm with the judge
Yeah.
for Grassley, lot development.
But in some ways, that's why, you know, this rule, you know, I don't think the conservation group should like this comment, but it kind of is to the point that the ODF and W currently, you know, if it's in one of their classifications of core habitat, which, you know. given
Category 1.
Category 1, they're gonna say avoid, you know, and even though they're not regulatory, they're gonna say that, and at least this, you know, these new rules that both, you know, LCDC and we're working on with the ODF and W as well, kind of go to this hierarchy in which you could still have development in the core area.
Right.
You know, if you've taken these steps that you know, talk about avoiding, minimizing, in you know, the case where you can't do either of those, that you're gonna, you know, have some mitigation requirements. So, you know, as an example, you know, ODF and W, Greg Foster is aware of this plan, he knows about it, and, you know, at one of our last planning commission meetings about the rock quarry example, you know, off of Highway 395, right in between Abert and Alkali Lakes, just right off the road. It was low density where the site was proposed, and the property itself clipped a little bit of core, but it was a distance that FOS recognized as not being a threat to that leg. But he also still said, but we want mitigation. That would be our recommendation, and if the rule is in place, that's absolutely what we'd say.
I was really tempted, Darwin, to tell him that latest scientific research is that sage grouse eat sunstone to help them digest, but I didn't think it was appropriate.
Well, especially because they don't have a gizzard, and they don't,
Yeah, he
can't
had
get in
enough
ground like
pressure
other
already,
birds.
yeah.
One thing, I appreciate everybody listening to my emotional talk and everything. This and the work that's been done on all this, the goal was to try to keep the sage grouse from being listed. And we gotta keep that even as I speak with some of my frustrations and many different things. There's that part in your head that says, are we doing the right thing?
I'm great, how are you?
We won't know, but you have to do something. It's better to be proactive than reactive. And so all the hard work that went into this, it is appreciated.
Yeah, so I thank you for that, and I couldn't agree more, that you know, keep our eye on the prize is pretty important. And that is trying to avoid listing and maintain our ability to make our own choices.
Yeah.
And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, I use a fisher. If this is Rocky Mountains and the Great Basin, us on this side, you know, Wyoming, Montana, Dakotas, Manitoba, etc. on this side, they're not going, they can do a geographical listing, like an area, but they're not going to pick out a state or area and say, well, not here. They have to be The threats over here is different than the threats over on our side. Our side is loss of habitat and not having consistency in our regulations. Over there, it's oil and gas and the plow behind the tractor turning sagebrush into the crops. So if we're different than Idaho, Nevada, and some of the other states on this side with our planning, if they can get up, the best thing is not to be listed and sage-grouse, goes forever. The second best is that listed on that side of the Rockies. The third best, if it's listed on this side, that we get a 4D rule.
Yeah, that's right. And then, and on that note, just so you know, timing wise, because Commissioner Winters, you did say that we're on a tight time frame. We're packing a lot in here in the next 6 weeks. And a lot of that has to do with trying to meet the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's timeline of their listing determination decision. They'll be making that in September. And so they're looking for everything from the state prior to that. So
I thought that Congress acted, it was going to be delayed for a while.
That was in the House. It's yet to go to the Senate and yet to be signed by the President.
I stand corrected.
yeah. So they're still
Proposal is
working.
out there.
Yeah, and we know that Paul Henson, who is our state's U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service representative back to the national conversation about the listing, they've already had one meeting now about this, where all the states are at. And he was glad to brag on where Oregon is, and continues to give us good feedback that we're heading in the right direction. But things will be wrapped up here pretty quick.
Yeah. Now, there's two aspects of Oregon compared to our surrounding states. One is we're much farther ahead, more progressive in our land use, and also getting things consistent across than Nevada and others. We're all behind on financial commitment.
Yeah.
Other states, long-term commitment. We got some, a year or two, but Fish and Wildlife Service is looking at 10 years or whatever. And that's where the wild bird seed tax is on the table to beef up the
Disagree with that
commitment.
tax. I know what I pay for, if you go through the regulations and see what we pay for application fees to the state of Oregon, Fish and Wildlife is about $2 million if you just roughly figure it up. I think they have money to,
It depends on
well,
whether
they
money.
need to tax our elderly that's feeding the birds, I guess.
I'm an elderly, of the three commissioner, and I think I'm the only one that feed birds.
Well, the Fish and Wildlife Service has said that there are three big components to Oregon's approach that all need to be in place. So one is the private land side, and so part of that is the CCAAs, part of that, and then part of that is the regulations on the rules that we're doing, and then the third is the funding. And so we do have a commitment through the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board where they've dedicated, they've made a decision to dedicate $10 million over 10 years. So that's a part of the funding that's already in place. The governor has come out strongly supporting a funding package specific to sage grouse, including fire and invasives. And that is continuing to work through the legislative session. We won't know what the outcome of that is, but it's still alive and it's moving forward, so that's good.
On the wild bird seed, my only suggestion is to have a caveat that anybody who turns 67 within the next few weeks and older are exempt from tax.
So, we'll debate that later. So, there's nothing can be in the rule or in the ODF&W, but if there's any way to acknowledge counties that are working hard to make this happen, the examples I use, we have private landowners doing everything they can on juniper, thinning, juniper eradication, if you want to call it. States help put dollars on a lot of that. But we're sort of setting the bar by trying to protect foreclosed lands that are in core habitat. There should be some kind of value.
Yeah, there's a lot of value to that. I think we attempted to make some overtures to the importance of volunteer, volunteerism and collaboration and county participation toward the introduction. you know, some of that stuff's pretty hard to put down in writing.
It is, it really is. I mean, I make a suggestion to Honda quite often is Ruby Pipeline came through here, they have $7 million for habitat. Partner up with the BLM, the water holes are pretty well taken care of, but in the drainages where the dams are blown out, have those re-engineered, have them built correctly, capture that water, water is life. For all habitat, for all, not just sagebrush. The only thing they tell me is, well, then we'll have a West Nile.
I'm sorry?
We'll have a West Nile, and kill the sagebrush. I've hunted enough in my life that the sagebrush, depending on the water, we create more habitat by more water, we have more birds. And so there should be value in that if we, whether it's a rancher, whether it's OHA, or anybody that enhances that, you know. Anyways, it's a long way.
It's not being acknowledged across the population of Oregon. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service acknowledges what's being done on the private lands with the juniper and other endeavors.
I think the people, yeah, I think people, folks in the know see that and respect that.
We just need to get it to our counterpart on the other side of the hill.
Yeah, and it's in the state action plan. Your example of not selling properties that have been foreclosed in core, I haven't heard that one before. And so that's definitely one, you know, I think we want to call out some examples of voluntary actions on the part of local government. I think that those are just good examples of, you know, good partnerships.
Well, you know, that hits us double, that we don't receive the taxes on it, and we
Yeah.
don't have land to
Yeah.
develop.
Yeah.
But the keeping the bird from being listed and protecting that habitat is more important at this point, so.
Yeah, and so, you know, we were talking this morning of Harney County Electric, Harney Rural Electric, and, you know, one of the things that they came up with was, so much of the rules are guiding development away from sensitive habitat, but he was saying, well, you know, if we've got transmission lines that we wanna replace, have to replace, you know, because of maintenance, and we don't, you know, we have the opportunity to get them out of core and put them somewhere else, shouldn't we get some kind of credit for that? I mean, how do we do that? You know, and so that's a conversation we're having, but again, it's that exact same kind of good stewardship thinking. We shouldn't be penalized because it's a new development in another area. We should get some credit for
It's
that.
mitigating effect.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's self-mitigating,
Yeah.
mitigation, I guess. But anyways, so rehash, one, not for you guys, but I should do it both. My concern over the map and the accuracy of it. And then the only other thing, I think all my questions, the only thing I really got to, and correct me if I'm wrong, John, because when I wrote it down, was my concern over the disturbance and the fire,
Yeah,
and the fire to be excluded from the disturbance.
Yeah, I've got that note down.
yeah.
There wasn't, and I'm trying for my own good, thought I need to put together, or have Darwin put together an email, so it's
We
covered.
got predators need to be considered, and that needs to be updated. Fire needs to be excluded.
I've got clarified re-permitting, potentially defined
Oh,
now.
yes, I thought
Then I've got Lake Catherine, and then,
did you keep notes too, Darwin?
I did.
Okay, let me write it
No,
down.
no, sure, sure, I can read.
The re-permitting is just, I think that one's pretty simple, like you said, it's just clarifying property permitting. And then, so it's really only a couple of things, as far as what's written down, is re-permitting and then the fire exclusion. The other comments, I don't know if they would go in the rule, but other comments, you know.
Sure.
Yep, and then the science
Yeah,
accepted by the state. It was a good conversation.
yeah, the science, I'm almost torn on that, I agree with you. But if you have a development come in and want to bring in their own people and pay for somebody to do,
And that's common, but they would provide that to the ODFW to say, yes, that's it,
okay,
stamp it.
so it could still be, that
Yes.
could
It
still
could be accepted by the
Okay.
state, yeah.
I'm comfortable. I
And
think
it
you
gets
make a
at-
good-
I'm sorry, it just gets out of that dueling sciences situation, which is really a bad place to be.
Yeah, I've just seen too many cases lost.
So Commissioner Sham should be done, we'll rehash all this for the next 2 hours.
As long as come out of that door.
He had, I forgot to announce, he had a conference call with some DC with the things, so. I don't
Meredith, Mike,
believe,
you guys have any?
with that, no other comments, we'll conclude this at 4:37.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
No, I'm glad to do it.
Yeah, we're glad to come down with you.
Just, yeah.